True Mortician Stories by Charred Torso, Part 2. Towards the end of my tenure as a corpse cop, I sold embalming chemicals and mortuary supplies. My sales territory included Southern California, Arizona, and Southern Nevada. One morning, my first stop was in Douglas, Arizona. I walked into a mortuary and the owner was on the phone. He told me that the sheriff had a coroner's case just outside of town and he didn't have anyone to help him remove the body. I volunteered and off we went. 10 minutes later, we rolled up in front of a one-room shack. There were 2 Coconese County Sheriff's deputies standing outside the shack, looking quite bored. There was barely enough room for the 4 living and 1 dead person to fit in the shack. There was a wretched bed frame with a filthy pad on it. Along one wall, a small cooking heating stove and a 3-drawer dresser. A 5-gallon paint bucket served as the toilet and garbage can. Seated up against the wall on the floor with his legs straight out was the reason we weren't eating breakfast at the Galveston Hotel. The deceased male appeared to be in his 70s and probably weighed 80 or so pounds. The mortician knew he wasn't going to make any money on this body and wanted to get back to town for a free breakfast. Neither of the deputies had any coroner's investigative training, so I lapsed into investigator mode and started asking the deputies background info. The dead guy had been living in this shack for as long as anyone could remember. About twice a month, he would walk into town and buy groceries and cigarettes. Based on a variety of factors, I determined he had been dead for about 3 days and had most probably died of natural causes. I had the cops look around the room for next of kin information and any valuables that should be removed from the shack for safekeeping. At that point, I put on a pair of autopsy gloves and got ready to do a basic field exam. I pulled on the deceased's legs to make them flat on the floor. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. The body appeared to tremble, then shake. The 2 cops, the mortician and I, stood wide-eyed as this emaciated body began to wiggle slightly and bounce on the filthy floor. As the body began to rock, everyone tried to distance themselves as much as possible from the dancing dead. Both cops bolted through the door outside, cussing all the way. Suddenly, the way oversized shirt on the deceased started raising and falling. Then, a huge giant rat flew out of the shirt and followed the deputies out the shack door. Sometime during the previous 3 days, the rat had taken residence in the shack dweller's guts, peacefully gnawing on the old-timer's internal organs. Our visit woke the rat up and he decided to leave. After a few more tentative kicks to the corpse to make sure there were no more rats, we continued with business as usual. Story 2. Silly Games Undertakers Play. Working in a funeral home can be boring, disgusting, and depressing. One of the ways some morticians cope, other than drugs and alcohol, is to do stupid stuff. The following are just a few stunts I've been involved in to keep things light and loose in corpse land. One day, a family brought in clothing for us to dress a relative in. They included a large, gaudy gold-colored crucifix, complete with a bloody corpus. As soon as the family went out the front door, I pointed the crucifix at my coworker. He began backing off, covering his eyes and hissing, in the finest vampire movie tradition. I shook the cross at him and yelled, "Body of Christ." He hissed louder and took off running towards the back of the building, with me giving chase. We got to the rear door of the mortuary. He burst out the back door and into the sunlight. I kept shaking the cross as he appeared to be shrinking from the sunlight. "Out, out, demon most foul." And he let out a muffled howl. Our entertainment was at an end. We were laughing when we turned around, only to see the deceased family standing there with shocked looks on their faces. All we could do was stop laughing and kept walking. On a boring Sunday, two of us had nothing to do, so we took a police baton that was laying around for protection and a wiffle ball into the mortuary chapel and decided to play baseball. We were having a great time, laughing and smacking the ball around the chapel. My coworker was at bat and swung. The baton slipped out of his grasp, sailing across the chapel and stuck 6 inches deep in the wall just under the big painting of Jesus. He had to rush to the hardware store and buy a drywall patching kit. The wall was patched and dry before our employer showed up Monday morning. When I worked in a high-volume, big mortuary, we did all kinds of stunts to amuse and abuse. We would spend our entire shift embalming. We had lockers to store our personal clothing in when we changed into the scrubs we wore. One trick was to break into a guy's locker and dress a body in his street clothing. Jocularity abounded when a body was observed wearing shorts and a tank top. It was even funnier if we put the clothing on a female. After several complaints to management by one individual, we stopped that practice. It wasn't uncommon to have 4 bodies being embalmed by 4 embalmers at 4 tables. We had giant exhaust fans over each table to suck up chemical fumes and gases, etc. The fans made so much noise, you couldn't hear yourself think or talk shit to the guy working at the table next to you. So often, we turned all the fans off. When an autopsied body is being embalmed, all of the viscera is removed and placed in a gut bucket. As the guts are exposed to warmer temperatures than a refrigerated body, gases begin to form mostly in the hollow organs like intestines and stomach. As gases are produced, the intestines begin to swell, sometimes to huge size. We found a great deal of amusement in walking by a bucket full of gassed up, swollen intestines and nipping them with a scalpel blade of scissors, causing the foul gases to escape. It was for all intent and purpose like a giant extra foul fart. Often, the victim of that foul prank would run gagging and cussing to turn on the exhaust fan. If it wasn't for stunts and pranks like these and others I will mention in later stories, I could never have lasted 22 years in that profession. Story 3: A Mortician's Nightmare. We were on coroner's rotation in the San Fernando Valley and received a call regarding 2 found bodies at an apartment building. When we arrived at the building, the news helicopters were flying in loops above the scene. I noticed a distinct lack of cops milling around, wasting time. At the same time, my partner and I got a faint whiff of decomposed bodies. A detective that didn't want to be there escorted us to the roof of the 2-story building. There was a small building on the roof that had some stored paints and other maintenance items and housed the top of the elevator for the building. Wedged in amid all of the other stuff were 2 morbidly obese bodies. They must have been dead for 7 to 10 days. The story put together by the detectives was that the couple were 2 mentally disabled adults that had been kicked out of their sheltered housing several weeks prior for doing some stupid shit. There was rotten food, human excrement, and garbage wedged around the badly decomposed corpses. Getting both of these rotten bodies into our mortuary vehicle was a challenge. But that was only the beginning. Because there were no obvious signs of death, autopsies were going to have to be conducted. A pathologist from the coroner's office would do the autopsies at our mortuary. Not only were the bodies obese, but they were blistered, leaking and emitting foul gases. We had to contend with maggots. The best part was that the loving couple had decided to wear every piece of clothing they owned. We spent over an hour peeling layer after layer of putrid-soaked clothing off of the bodies. To top things off, the families of both adults arrived and were demanding free funerals for both of them. These people had been living at taxpayer expense for their entire lives, and the family saw no reason to start paying for them when they died. The mortuary was under no legal obligation to pay for their send-off. Harsh words were exchanged. We kept both bodies in our freezer after their autopsies for several weeks, until the county gave in and gave them a county cremation and burial.